Hi, I'm Kristen, and this is Scrap Fabric Love, and this is the final video of the Shattered Scraps Quilt Along. I am sat in the middle of my disaster area of a sewing room with my cup of coffee and a cold. So my son brought a cold back for me from Cub Camp the other weekend, so I might sound a bit scratchy in this video, but we're gonna persevere. Do you remember in the first video of the Quilt Along when I showed you all of the ways I was going to keep my sewing space neat and tidy during this Quilt Along? Yeah, that didn't take. But I did get my 2 quilts finished. So in the video today, I'm going to show you my progress with those, show you how they turned out. And then after that, I've got a treat for you because I got permission from a whole bunch of folk from my scrap club to share their progress photos for the Shattered Scraps Quilt Along. So you're gonna get to sit back and see how they have adapted this pattern using their own scraps. So that's gonna be the best part of this video. And then just to wrap things up at the end, I'll explain to you what the process is gonna be for drawing the winners for the Quilt Along prizes. So I'll get to that at the end. But first, let me show you how I finished my 2 Shattered Scraps quilts. So when I left you last time, I'd finished the rainbow quilt top. It was ready for quilting. And then for the purple one, I needed to make a little border to make it the right size. Before I did any of that, I had to rummage through my bag of batting, which is what this is. It's a great big, huge bag full of anything I could use for batting. Flannel sheets, wool blankets, leftover bits of batting from other projects. Everything just gets shoved in there. And I decided, since this is a quilt along about using what you have, I needed to get in there and get some of it used. So I did a little bit of a sort, and I pulled out some flannel sheet bits, mostly the blue that you can see up in the top of the screen there, and some other flannel bits from my mother-in-law's quilt, and then all of the bamboo batting scraps I could find for the rainbow one. Of course, none of these bits are exactly the right size, so it's going to involve me doing a bit of piecing, but if it's going to get me some usable batting and get some of this mess out of my sewing room, I'm all for it. So I found this blue flannel sheet in my bag of batting stuff. If you haven't seen my previous video about alternative battings that you can use other than just store-bought kinds, flannel sheets are one of my favorite. I especially use them in denim quilts because the denim's already heavy. But I'm using this one for my mother-in-law's quilt because she's asked for like a coverlet weight. So she wants it to be sort of thin, more like a bedspread that's going to go kind of on top and be decorative and not be too heavy. So this is a fairly thin flannel sheet. And I think it was maybe a single, not sure, but I had to basically cut it up into sections. And then I needed to do some piecing. So the quilt as you go method that I'm going to use, which I'll show you in a few minutes, it involves sewing together rows or sections and then joining and flipping the backing and hiding the raw edges inside. So I need my batting to be the same size as those sections that I'm joining. So the flannel wasn't quite the right length and everything like that. And I had 5 sections that my quilt was made up of. So this is me just zigzagging the flannel together, kind of like if you've ever done Franken batting, where people join pieces of regular quilt batting with zigzag stitches. That's all I'm doing. So I'm just trying to use as much of the blue sheet as I can and trying to get it to the length and width that I need for the sections. Now, I ran out of the blue sheet before I got my sections to the sizes I needed, so I had to supplement with a different colored flannel. I had a pillowcase in the batting bag, but it was a very similar weight, so I used this to add to the sections and get everything the size I needed. And then I did the same thing for the rainbow quilt, except I was using my bamboo batting scraps. So this is me just pulling all those, those just bits of batting that you cut off the side when you're done a quilt, or maybe you bought a larger size of batting at a show or something because it was a good deal, and then you used it to make a smaller quilt and you have this whole big bit left. Anyway, I've got bits big and small, and so I was piecing those with that zigzag stitch to get it the size I needed for the rainbow quilt as well. So I have definitely emptied out a little bit of that batting bag. Still have too much, but I've used a good chunk of it. So here's what my batting looks like for the quilt. Maybe not particularly squared up, but it's big enough. And you're not going to notice those zigzag joins once it's all quilted up. I do have another video on the channel about how to do this if you've not seen it before. Once the batting was ready, I was ready to get the rainbow quilt on the long arm. The backing, I just used some yardage that I've had sitting around my sewing room for far too long. Can't even remember what I bought it for. And I quilted the quilt with straight-ish lines going across the quilt using a pink thread that matches the accent fabric in my kind of like pink diamond centers in this version of the quilt. So I'll show you how this turns out a little later in the video. But when I wanted to take a break from quilting this, I was also working on the borders for my purple quilt. So let me show you how I was getting on with that. Okay, so these are the skinny border strips on the side I've been doing. Honestly, it doesn't look much like a border. It's more like a quilt extender strip to get to the size that my mother-in-law was looking for, because she wants, it is for a double bed, but she doesn't want any overhang. She just wants it to lay flat. So I guess she's measured the top of her bed, and that's where this measurement's coming from. So these are really skinny 1.5 by 14.5 inch strips. And because I had to piece the mauve, like literally that was what I had left of the mauve, to get it the color I wanted on the side, I pieced the other ones too. So they're not solid strips, right? They're just like, let me move this, you can't see the whole thing, but so they're just these, so I haven't attached them yet, but I'm going to do that. And here and there you get these kind of happy accidents where, you know, I've somehow used a little bit of the same fabric that's right there. I kind of like that stuff. I like that when you lay out the blocks as well. So like here, for example, I could have flipped this block around, but I liked that this particular fabric was here, here, and also on the one above it. So I try and do that when it happens. It doesn't always happen, but when I can add a bit of that, like here as well on this side strip. So I didn't plan it. It's just like when I went to put it down, I was like, I could do it this way, I could do it that way. Let's do it this way. And then this fabric lines up with that one, you know what I mean? So that's some of the stuff that makes me happy when I do sort of semi-improv-y, crumb-piecey type of stuff, is when fabrics line up when you didn't intend it. Anyway, so what I'm going to do next is just sew those onto the sides of the rows, because this is still just in rows. And then I'm going to do the top and bottom sort of wider 58.5 by 4.5 inch borders. It's going to be choppy just to keep it the same, as in like, but it's not going to be such tiny crumbs as in these teeny weeny quilt extender strips. So I will add, once I've done that, I will add the top border to row 1, so that my section that I'm working for as 1 is just going to be bigger, and obviously for the same for the bottom. So I'm going to be putting together my purple quilt using the join and flip quilt as you go method. If you haven't seen me talk about this on the channel before, I've got loads of other videos, and the best one I think is this full quilt demo. So that's going to explain to you how it works and all the options. It's basically a fun quilt as you go method where you don't have to roll anything under the throat space of your machine. You don't need to do any hand sewing, and there's no joining strips or things like that. So I will explain how it works a bit in this video, but if you want the full demo, I would recommend this video. Okay, this is what I have prepped for the purple quilt as you go version. It's all draped on the long arm just to show you. I'm not doing it on the long arm, but anyway, so I've got my 5 rows, but I'm calling them sections now because the bottom one and the top one are wider as rows than the middle of the 3, because they've got these borders on, or quilt extender strips, or whatever we're calling them, right? So the middle ones are 14.5 by 58, and these ones are 18.5, 19, or something like that. 14.5 plus a 4.5 inch border. 18 inches by 58, can't remember. Anyway, they're bigger. So I've got those. I've got my batting, which is my strips of flannel sheet. And so they are the same width as the sections. In previous videos, I've shown you different measurements for the batting, either the same size as the section or 1/4 inch, 1/2 inch smaller so that you can slot it in. I'm not doing the slotted in thing, so mine are the same width as my sections, and the flannel's fairly thin because we're doing this coverlet thing, so I don't need to worry about bulk or anything like that. So it's just the same size. Then I've got backing strips here. So I've got 3 that are that 14.5 by 58, and that's for the 3 middle rows. And then I've got 2 that are wider. So they're like the 18.5, 19, whatever it was, by 58. And that's for the 2 on the either end. And I've got 1 here. This one is a really thin, it's really thin. So I've doubled it up. And it actually is in the quilt, not doubled up, and I don't know if that was a mistake. But anyway, so this section is doubled up to just try and make it a bit thicker. But anyway, so this is what I had left. The purple was kind of these strips, and some of them had to be, some of them I had long bits. Obviously there's no mauve because we ran out of mauve. And then I've got one, this one, that's just completely had to be pieced because I didn't have anything long enough. But that's going to be one of the backings for the rows there. Right, so, and then I have 4 shades of my Isacord thread that I like. So I've got like a dark purple for that section, found a mauve one, I think that's the lavender, and I decided that's as close as I've got to heather. So I actually did have a lot of purple Isacord threads from, if you're a long time watcher, you'll have seen maybe a video several years ago where I bought somebody's box of various Isacord threads, and I still have a lot of them, lots of different colors that I might not have bought separately on my own. So I actually have all the purples I need, and I can do a different color for each section. So my first step in getting this quilt put together was to spray baste the flannel batting to the row. So I did this for each section of the purple quilt. No backing yet, just the batting and the row or the section that I want to use. So you don't have to use spray based, you can use pins, but I use spray based, and then I just ironed it to try and get it a bit smoother and flatter before I started working with it. So one of the reasons I wanted to do this quote as you go, was because of my quilting plan. So I wanted to do these up and down rows of stitching in 1 patch per quarter block for each of the blocks of the quilt, and then also do some vertical lines in between the blocks. But then when I put it together, I'll have more quilting lines going in the other direction. So if you've not seen this quote as you go method before, maybe just hold on and have a watch. But this is what I like, where I can kind of rotate the whole section, which obviously is not something I could do with a whole quilt under a domestic. I could do this probably with rulers on a long arm, but sometimes I like to sit down, and at the time I was doing this, I still had the rainbow one on the long arm. So I can be working on 2 quilts at once as well. So anyway, I quilted all 5 of the sections like that, but this is just with the flannel batting and the row quilt top bit. No backing yet, because we need that free to flip and join and hide our seams inside as we join. So here's my section 1. So this is the one that's got the border on the top. You can see the quilting through the back on the flannel a bit. And that's, you're not going to see that once I put the backing on with the way that I'm using this method. But I am going to do a few additional quilting lines once I get the backing on. So you will see some of that through the back. Anyway, so I start with row 1. The only thing I've trimmed is this edge, which is the one I'm going to join to row 2. This is all skew-if. The ends are all skew-if. I don't care about that. I can trim that later. This is the one I need to be trimmed. So I've done that. Then I'm going to get my second row. So that's this one. And for me, I'm just checking, making sure it's definitely the right one. Yep, I've got the lavender. Yeah, I've got all the things lined up that I want. So this is my second row. And again, I've trimmed just the edge that I'm going to join here. So I'm putting it right sides together, and I'm going to look under and join where the blocks are going to meet in a second, but I'm going to get my backing fabric first. Hang on. Doubled up purple is the wider backing for the first row that's got the border, and this one is for the second row. So these are solids, so you can't tell, but what I'm going to do is put the backing fabric right sides together. So it doesn't really matter with this because it's a solid, but if you've got a print, pay attention to that. And I'm lining up the raw edges because these are different sizes. My second row backing is narrower than the first row. So I'm just going to line that up. I can do more lining up and pinning and stuff in a second. I'm just showing you the sandwich. Right. Then I put row 1, so that's the wider one. So that one is going wrong side to wrong side with the backing. So this is the backing I want to see when I open it up, and this is the right side of the backing I want to see for row 2, okay? And then row 2 goes right sides to right sides with row 1, and then we're going to join, flip open, and do some quilting. So as I said, I've got that longer video if this is too like, what is she doing? Because I don't want to spend too long on it here because I have got lots of other videos about it. So that's the sandwich, but before I pin and join, because this row here is the first one, I can do the quilting I want to do on this row before I do any joining. So I'm going to do that because the great thing about this method is you can kind of do a section, do what you like, join, and then this gets pushed over this away, and then I only have the next section here that I need to worry about quilting. So as long as I've got like an extension like this or another table butted up against your sewing table or something like that, you don't have to roll the quilt under the throat of your machine. You can just have everything going off to the side. So rather than join this and then have to squiggle around with 2 rows, I'm going to quilt this one with its backing first. But I can't do that with row 2 because I need to be able to have this loose to flip it open and join. If you've never seen this method, hopefully it'll make sense in a minute. And if it doesn't, as I said, I've got other videos. So that was just to show you the sandwich, but I'm going to put these two, so the row 2 and row 2 backing aside for a minute. And what I'm going to do is make sure I've got this all lined up the way I want, maybe use some clips and pin it a bit. And then I'm going to put, so what I want to do, because I've already done these little, you know, what do you call it? Patch quilting? I don't know. Quilting in little bits. What I want now is just to add some, I guess it's going to, once the quilt's done, it'll be horizontal lines, but in terms of how I'm sewing them, they're going to be vertical, right? So I started off by clipping and pinning the backing for section 1 in place. So at this point, the sandwich is just the same as if this was just like a really long, narrow quilt, right? There's nothing different. And I'm just quilting. So I'm doing some quilting in the border, and then decided to go kind of around the diamonds and along the middle seam of each block. So I decided I liked the look of that. So I'll show you that bit in a minute. But what I'm doing here is coming into the quilt with a stitch from the side of the border because I've changed my thread to the darker color. So I had the kind of mauve thread on when I was doing the top bit of this section, and now I've got the dark purple on. So I was doing a lot of thread changing for this to keep with that for purple ombre, whatever we're doing thing with this. So the good thing about quilting a quilt in sections like this is you can kind of come at it from a different angle and start where you want. I had all these pieced bits to the border, so I thought I might as well make a feature of just lines going off in different directions. I really like that in sort of Quilt As You Go, or even just in other people's quilts that I've seen, when the quilting lines kind of confound you a little bit. I like that. So I was kind of doing a little bit of that. And this is where basically I just used my presser foot, lined it up to the central seam in the block, and then just skirted kind of around those diamonds. So I was just doing a line on one side and then coming back and doing it the other way. And that's really the only quilting I was adding in the middle of the rows, because of course any quilting that I'm doing on the backing fabric is not like essential. The bit where we need the quilting is in our batting. So depending on what kind of batting you're using and what the manufacturer's suggestion is, that's how far apart you can have your quilting. But the backing fabric doesn't matter. We just need to have it attached, right? So in this instance, I'm going to have a few quilting lines through to the backing, but sometimes when I use this method, I don't have any. So it's just personal choice as far as that goes. So once that first section was quilted, I made my sandwich up, not just my bagel sandwich there, my quilt sandwich up, like I showed you at the beginning, with the 2 quilted sections right sides together and the 2 backing sections right sides together. And I'm using a regular stitch, 1/4 inch seam allowance to join that all together. So we open up the front, it's good. Let me check the back, make sure it all, yeah. All right, now I need to press this flat, and then I'm gonna do I like to do a seam either side of the ditch when I do this, and that kind of fits with my quilting design anyway. So I'm gonna do that. Then I'm gonna do my lines here like I was doing that I decided I like, and then I'll go on and join the next section, and I'll trim little threads like that are poking out as well. But anyway, so I'm basically gonna press this seam the way you would if it was just, you know, sewing blocks together to make it lie a bit flatter, and then I'm going to do those 2 quilting rows. And the reason that I like this method, apart from the no hand sewing, no joining strips bit of it, is that it does keep the bulk of the quilt off to the left. So you only ever have 1 row under your throat space, and it's just so much easier to handle. So this is me putting together the next section. So again, I'm putting the backing for the next row right sides together on the back, and then the next section right sides together on the top. And it's really as simple as that. And then all you're doing is your 1/4 inch seam down that raw edge. And the most important bit is just that you're pinning especially those joins. So you can see here, I'm just pinning where I want the joins of the block to meet up. So the same places like in the FPP tutorial where I was showing you to use a clip, I would use a pin or a clip here just to make sure that things are lining up the way I want. So we're not doing anything complicated here. I suppose it's just a case of getting used to the way the sandwich works in terms of, you know, the backing fabric being right side together, and when you can add the additional quilting lines with your backing if that's something that's important to you. So again, if any of this is unclear, I do have that much longer full quilt tutorial. And there are just so many ways to change this method for what you want to do. So if you're watching this and going, I don't like that the batting's in the seams, or I don't like that the backing's unquilted, there's just so many different ways to adapt this. So do go and watch one of my other Quilt As You Go videos if you're not sure if you can do what you want to do. I bet you can. So give it a try. So I just kept doing the same again, flipping it open once it's been joined, ironing, adding any additional quilting with the backing fabric, and then joining the next section in exactly the same way as the last. And each time the bulk of that quilt is going off to the left. Nothing has to be rolled up. And if you've got a table over to the side holding that weight, it just makes it so much simpler. I've had lots of comments from folk telling me that this method has allowed them to make bigger quilts than they were able to before. It's not like, this is not my method. It's from it's from people who were doing it on serger machines, overlocking machines that I saw a video of, and I was like, can I do this without a serger? Turns out you can. So that's all it is. But it is just a really simple way to allow yourself to make a bigger quilt without hurting your shoulders and your back and all of that. And it's not going to fix everybody's issue. There's so many different Quilt As You Go methods that solve so many different problems. But if your issue is handling that bulk and not being able to maneuver big quilts through your machine in the way you used to, this might be worth a try for you. So here I am quilting that last section of the quilt. And as you can see, there is nothing rolled up under the throat of that machine. So that is why I like this method, because that was the issue I was having before I had the long arm. And as I say, I go back and forth now. So I might do one quilt on the long arm and one on the domestic, or I do use this Quilt As You Go method a lot for denim quilts, because I love my denim quilts, but they get a bit stretchy on the long arm. It's not ideal. So I do like this method for that as well. So after it was all joined, all I needed to do was give those edges a quick trim, because I'd cut my batting and things a little bit bigger than I needed. And then I used the rest of the purple leftovers to make a binding, which I kind of tried to match what was in the rest of the quilt as closely as I could, minus the mauve that I'd totally run out of course. And now for my humorous attempts at an outdoor photo shoot in the notorious Edinburgh winds. This is the rainbow one. I really am pleased with how it came out. I just used more of the low volume scraps for the binding on that one. And the back is just that plain blue that I showed you. So nothing crazy. Not sure where that's going to go yet, but I'm sure I'll find a home for it. And this is the purple one. A little bit harder to hold up because it's a bit bigger and the wind was getting a bit stronger. So I did manage to take some photos of it on my wall outside. It's a little bit grippy, the stone, so I can kind of put it over the top of the wall and take some photos sometimes. So I'm actually, for all the headaches that this one gave me with the purples, I'm kind of happy with how it turned out. I was also worried about how thin it was going to be with this whole coverlet idea. I thought it would be too flimsy, but it's got some weight with the flannel inside. It's not too thick. I don't think it's too warm, but it's got a nice feel to it. And I kind of quite like the texture of the places where there's quilting in some places and not in others. That's the kind of texture I like in quilts. So I hope my mother-in-law likes it too. But enough about my quilts. Now let's move on to the star of today's video, which is all of the lovely Shattered Scraps quilt progress shots that I've been allowed to share by members of my scrap club. So grab a cup of something, settle in, and have a look at all of this gorgeousness. I did have a few more names than I had photos, so if yours has got left out here by mistake, it's just an admin thing on my part, not because I didn't like your blocks. So that is it from me in terms of videos about the Shattered Scraps quilt along. But I still have my mystery scrap pack prizes to give out. So if you remember from the first video, there's one larger box and two smaller ones that have got scrap fabric to play with, a few little notions, and just some kind of treats and some Scrap Club stickers as well. So if you are a member of Scrap Club and you have shared a photo either inside Scrap Club or on Instagram or by email with me, then you're already entered. I've written your name down. And you still have time because I'm not drawing the winners until the 23rd of September, which is next Tuesday. You don't have to have finished the quilt. As I said, all you need to enter is a photo of any kind. It doesn't even have to be a full block. If you've done a quarter block or a quarter of a quarter block and you've shared a photo, then you're in with a chance to win. So what I'm going to do is figure out that whole spinning wheel thing where you enter the names onto a program on the computer and it spits out the winner. And I'm going to do that on Tuesday the 23rd. Again, if I can work out the technology, I'm going to do it live inside Scrap Club. There's a function inside Patreon where I can go live, I think. But I haven't put it, if you're in Scrap Club, that's not in the events calendar because I don't know exactly what time it's going to be. But once it's done, it will be on as a recording so you can still see who's won. But that's the plan. So I'll be drawing the winners on the 23rd. So make sure if you haven't already to share a photo as your entry for the prizes. And if you're not a member of Scrap Club yet and you want to join, of course you can anytime. The link is in the description box for this video. And if you're just finding the quilt along now, you can still get all of the materials for it and all the past quilt alongs inside. And we'd love to see you there. So thanks so much to everyone who's been quilting along with me, especially those members of my Scrap Club who've been so generously sharing with each other and with me inside Scrap Club about their progress. It's been so fun to see it all come together. I love these quilt-alongs. But with this cold and everything else, I'm exhausted now, guys. So I'm going to go lie in a dark room after this. And then I will come back next week with something else for you. So I hope to see you then. Thanks so much for spending time with me. Bye.